Hello and welcome to another AfterMaths episode of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths. With me, John Cripwell.
And me, Becky Brown.
Hello again, Becky. How are you?
Hello, John. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I've been doing lots of thinking about problem solving this week, preparing for a new project, and spending some of that time solving problems, which I've particularly enjoyed. What have you been up to this week, John?
Yeah, that's always good, isn't it? To actually get to do a little bit of maths yourself. I always think that's an important part of planning any sort of maths for anybody else, really. You need to have a go at doing it yourself. But yes, important secret projects coming up. I'm sure we can tell everybody about it very soon. I've had a lovely week so far. So yesterday I was in Birmingham at an NCETM event. So lovely to catch up with lots of people there, including Lewis Horsley, of course, who was on this podcast talking about collaborative planning approaches on his interview episode, and Tom Isherwood as well, who was also on the podcast talking about planning maths as well and sort of leading maths across the trust. So it was great to see them and a few others. Debbie Morgan was there and led us in a sort of example lesson where she took the part of the teacher and we took the part of the pupil. So again, it was nice to do some of that maths on the other side, if you like. It's just seeing what it's like from the pupil's point of view and considering the structure of the maths and why things have been planned in a certain way. So yeah, it's really good.
Sounds great.
What are we talking about this week then, Becky?
We are going to be talking a little bit about money. I've got some etymology to share a bit later on. You've got some research in 60-ish seconds. I'm sure it will be a little bit more.
Yeah, quite a big ish there, I think. It might take more than 60 seconds, I think. But some really interesting findings from it. So I'm excited to talk about that.
Great. We are also going to talk briefly about the curriculum drafters because that's been announced this week. And also we have a few listener sat survival tips and stories to share as well.
Absolutely. So let's start with money, shall we, Becky? Because I was talking to somebody, a teacher, year two teacher, currently year two teacher, about money last week and how we teach money and things. And I'm sure we're all aware, aren't we, that the way that children interact with money and see money and things these days has changed an awful lot in probably just the last 5 or 6 years, really. We don't see money being used in the same way that we used to. I can't remember the last time I paid for something in a shop with cash. How about you, Becky?
No, same thing. And I think you're right. It is quite a recent thing because I think I remember, so my children are teenagers now, but I remember collecting coins in a bottle, anytime they get spare change. And that has kind of died right down now because people don't tend to have. I think the only time I've seen it is when I've gone to a carnival or something like that where people have collected, still been shaking tins, as well as, of course, contactless payment devices.
Yes.
But yes, certainly it has changed enormously.
Yeah, I remember when £2 coins were first introduced. My nan used to collect them for us and kept them in a tin in her kitchen in a cupboard on the top shelf, an old biscuit tin. One of those biscuit tins that was really disappointing usually because you open it up expecting to find biscuits and instead find, knitting or sewing kits and things. But this time you opened it up and it was full of £2 coins.
Wow.
And it was brilliant. And she used to save those so that she could give us some of them every time we came round. So I don't know how old I was when £2 coins were introduced, but I've got a feeling I was probably end of primary school, maybe. But as a child growing up, I certainly saw money and coins and cash and things in a way that my children just don't these days, because I don't even pay with things on my card anymore. Just pay on my phone. And sometimes, my youngest, who is just coming up to 8, will say, "Can I pay this time, Daddy?" And, want to hold the phone up to the contactless payment point and things. But that's kind of the only time that she really gets to interact with money. So I do think it's interesting the way, and it will be interesting to see whether in the new curriculum this changes a little bit and we're teaching things in a different way. But part of this conversation that I was having with the teacher was about some of the issues with teaching money, because when you think about it, it doesn't really conform to the standards that we normally, or the structures that we normally have in maths. And certainly, I think for when it's introduced in year two and into year three, there's a lot of prerequisite knowledge that you need in order to be able to deal with coins and things, and that's even more complicated now that it's less familiar. I think one of the big things, Becky, for me is that we often use money to introduce this idea of decimal fractions. Really, if we're talking about £2 and 42p, we're thinking of 42p as being 42 hundredths of the next pound. A part of the next pound, aren't we? But
Yeah.
we don't call it 2.42 as we would do with a decimal. We call it £2 42, and that can have a little bit of a an effect of creating a misconception, can't it, around decimal numbers, I think.
Yeah, I've always found it a little bit, well, and I completely understand it from a mathematical point of view, but when we introduce money, we don't introduce it in a decimal format because children haven't come across that yet.
Yeah.
But of course, they're seeing it in a decimal format all of the time.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. In shops and things,
Yeah,
on price labels and things, it's £2.99, isn't it, or
yeah,
£3.99 or whatever. So yeah, they certainly are, and it's one of those things that you just have to understand that it means that the 2.99 means £2.99, doesn't it? But
yeah.
that's I just think it's one way that the how we use numbers can be a little bit confusing. And we've talked before, Becky. Actually, you talked before, didn't you, about how in this country we use a what looks like a decimal point to separate the pounds and the pence, but in other countries they might use other forms of punctuation, like a comma and things, which can just
Yeah,
complicate things even further. So I think that's one of the issues with it. I was also thinking that coins, they're sort of a non-linear system, aren't they? As in, you have a 1p coin, a 2 pence coin. You don't have a 3 pence coin. We then go to five
not anymore.
pence. No, not anymore. Yeah, not anymore. Exactly. And it's all changed, hasn't it? As my mum would say, since she went to school. And then, so you've got 5p and then 10p and then 20p, 50p, a pound and £2 in terms of coins, which I hope is not news to anybody out there, by the way. Hopefully everybody listening is still familiar with these coins. And what's wonderful about those coins, though, is that you can make any number, can't you, with those coins? Um, but it's all about that the coins exist so that you can do it in the most efficient sort of way. And so
Yeah,
you really have to think about how you're going to combine those coins together to make different amounts. And there's loads and loads and loads of maths in there, isn't there?
yeah. It's a problem-solving dream, isn't it? Working with money and thinking about best ways to do things or numbers of coins, and certainly, thinking about paying for things, going back a long way, and I not in my memory, but of cashiers being able to calculate mentally and count back or count up. Um, yeah, it's quite fascinating, really, and there is just something lovely about coins, I think.
Yeah, I had a couple of part-time jobs actually where the till could give you the change, but it would give you the amount that you had to give back in change, but it obviously didn't tell you how to make that amount. So sometimes you really had to think about it. And it was probably one of the ways that I became a little bit more fluent with number. Actually, was
Hmm.
having to do those mental calculations quite quickly when trying to give a customer change. There's loads of complex structures as well within money when you're looking at it. So I was thinking about this. I was thinking there are obviously additive structures, as we were just talking about there, with additive structures, including subtraction, of course, when giving change and things and making amounts and that sort of thing. But you've also got multiplicative thinking. So knowing that two 50p coins make a pound. I mean, you could think about that as additive, but it's also multiplicative. If you've got five of them, you know that that's £2.50. We've got a form of decimal notation that doesn't really conform to decimal notation uh, etiquette, I suppose. And then you've got this structure of equivalence as well that we were talking about a little bit yesterday, actually, at the NCTM event. And this idea that, 5 20p's are equivalent to a pound. And all of this is happening. So we're doing this, and I know we wouldn't necessarily introduce all of these things in year two, but children are thinking about these things in year two. And it does make me wonder about the order that we introduce money in, and whether year two is still the best place for money to be sort of introduced in the curriculum, or whether
Yeah.
maybe a little bit later might be better these days.
Yeah, I hate to mention time, John, but thinking about the conversation, sorry,
I know,
thinking about the
yeah, I've just
conversations
gone white.
we
Yeah,
have around time, it's very similar, isn't it? It's a massive concept introduced very early on where there is actually an awful lot of structure there, and it's an awful lot to take in at such a young age. I mean, I could only imagine the conversations we would have been having pre-decimalization. That would
yes.
that I can't even imagine. We do have, at least it is decimalized, even if it doesn't quite fit. But yeah, you're right. It's something that is actually, when you start looking into how much maths is involved and how much knowledge is needed, it's huge.
Yeah, you can understand why it can be a tricky topic and a tricky subject, but it's one that definitely needs to be really hands-on, I think, in my opinion. The idea that you could teach money just with worksheets and things doesn't work for me. I think it's something that it's maths that we need to be doing, not just watching, and we need to be, getting the coins out, getting the plastic coins out. Getting some real coins out would be nice as well. Go to the office, see if they'll lend you some coins to use with the children. But being able to actually get hands on with this stuff, particularly now that children don't get the opportunity to do so very often. I remember setting some homework for year two class last year, working with a teacher, setting some homework, which was to go home and ask the parents if they could, go to the shop and spend some money with them, just on the weekly shop, or go and buy, a magazine or something, but pay in money and get a little photo of it, or be able to come back and talk about it, and just making it real. I was thinking about the chaos of school trips when we occasionally allowed children to visit the shop at school trips. But the amount of learning that happened because of that, and I know it's chaotic, and I know it's tricky to manage the equity of that as well, when some children have got money and some children haven't, and all those sorts of things. But the conversations that I used to have with children about whether they could afford something or not, and how they knew, and how they could, looking at the money that they had left in their little purse or wallet or whatever they brought with them, and what they could buy because they were desperate to spend this money. It was burning a hole in the. If they took it home, it was going back to mum or dad,
Yeah.
wasn't it? So it needed to be spent. Um, what's the most random thing you bought on a school trip, Becky? I
Oh,
reckon mine.
well,
I'll give you a moment here. I reckon mine. We went on a school trip, an overnight school trip, in about year 8, I think, to France. Um, uh, so we left at about midnight from school, and we got back about midnight the following night, or maybe 1 in the morning. And we travelled down from Derby to Dover, went over on the ferry, I think, as far as Calais. We never left Calais. That was it. We had a little wander around. We went to a hypermarket, and I still had some money left. So I'd gone all the way to France, and I brought back my mum a box of mint matchmakers from the hypermarket in France. They didn't even have French writing on them. They were just a box of mint matchmakers. I knew that she liked mint matchmakers,
oh,
and I
that's
certainly like them. So even if she didn't appreciate them, I knew I would. But yeah, I couldn't quite afford the ball sets and things like that they had over there. But I thought, yeah, box of
that's
mint
it.
matchmakers, and I
I
couldn't
think.
understand why she was disappointed.
Oh, a lot of
No,
thought went into that.
yeah,
I think, I mean, children, I love taking children to the shop on a school trip. Yes, it's chaos, but it's wonderful chaos. And it often is the thing they remember the most, even though
yep,
they've seen all this glorious history or art or whatever it is. Um, and I think it is a case of they want to spend as much as they can of that money. So sometimes they do end up with a little bit of a random selection. I must have been maybe I was not at school yet, but my sister is 4 years older than me. She went on a school trip and she wanted to bring me back a present. And the thing that she wanted to buy me was an ice lolly.
oh, she
She
was
must have
she
been
was in sixth
maybe
form at the time,
six.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
she was
right,
18.
okay. Yeah.
Now, obviously, the teacher did explain that she couldn't take me nice lolly home, but I love that story, and I just think, oh, that just says it all, doesn't it? Going to the school trip with the money, and you're thinking about other people and what you might want to take home to show them.
Absolutely, yeah. Box of matchmakers, an ice cream. Says a lot about you, Becky, and what you were into at that, a
Yeah, the
nice
age of
lolly
2.
was the ultimate. Yeah, yeah. You weren't allowed to buy them out from the house, we've got ice lollies at home in the freezer. So,
Yes.
yeah. Um, all of which to say, I think it just that money lessons are so important now, probably even more important than they used
Mhm.
to be, because we just don't get to experience paying for things with money in the same way that we used to. And that sort of ties into, I know it's not quite the same thing, but it does tie into the wider conversation around financial education as well. And you need to start with money, don't you, and understanding money in order to have a sense of how money works, so that you can understand financial education too, and the wider conversations around justice and fairness and budgeting and all those sorts of things that come into financial education. We do have, don't we, Becky, some brilliant resources on the Twinkle website, in conjunction with Santander, the bank, around financial education, and they are, I know we would say that, but they are really, really useful in so much as the activities that they include. There's some maths, but it's a lot of PSHE type activities in there around financial education, including opportunities for justifying and talking and making decisions, and a lot of those core skills that you need when you're thinking about money and making financial decisions and things, which we know. I think we referenced this a couple of months ago on the podcast, that parents and teachers feel is a really important part of a child's education now. We need to be preparing them for making those decisions in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's like every area of maths, isn't it? That you need to start with something concrete to make that abstract make sense. And I think money has become more and more abstract. I mean, how easy is it just to tap a card and not really think about how much you're spending?
Yeah, it's the reason
But
don't have any money anymore. Yeah,
yes, I even watches. People pay on their watch now,
yeah,
so I think the more and more abstract it's become, the more important that those foundations are there in learning what it actually means and how it all works. So
yeah.
yeah,
It's
really
amazing the
important.
ways that they've devised in order to part you from your money more easily now,
Yes.
isn't it? Even with your watch, you forgot your wallet. Don't worry, you can pay with your watch. Yeah, there's no excuse now. Um, so yeah, if you've got any top tips on teaching money, or any funny stories about teaching money, any misconceptions that you've had children tell you about, please do get in touch as ever. Primary Maths Podcast at twinkle.co.uk. And while you're there, why not just click on subscribe, or give us a like, or leave us a comment on our YouTube video? We would very, very much appreciate it. Um, so we're just going to very quickly, just because it's in the news this week, the uh, curriculum drafters, that's those people that are responsible for writing the new curriculum due out in 2028, have been appointed this week. And there are some familiar names in there, aren't there, Becky?
There are, yes. I'm sure these names across the whole board have been Googled an awful lot by anyone in education, just to find out a little bit about who the people are that are drafting the new curriculum. But yes, it was lovely to see some familiar names. Maybe not surprising, but that I think is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So the one that jumps out to me, well, there's two names. That's not fair. I won't say which two names jump out to me particularly, but I think for everybody there's going to be some names that are more familiar and some that are maybe less familiar. But in the order that I've got them written down here, Lynn McClure, who I know you're familiar with, Becky. So she was very much involved in the Enrich project
Yep.
at Cambridge University, as well as other things as well. She's got a wealth of experience in terms of maths and maths education, so that's exciting. Charlie Strip, he is the CEO of Maths in Education, MEI, which is the company behind the NCETM. So he is sort of oversees the whole of the NCETM, which, so again, given the direction of travel that we've had in maths education over the last 10 years or so, makes perfect sense that somebody like Charlie would be involved. Again, I think much like Lynn, he has also chaired the Maths Association, and yeah, been just completely involved in pedagogical conversations and things over the last few years. Then there's three more that are also named this week. David Thomas, who was responsible for founding, or one of those responsible for founding Oak Academy, now at Axiom Maths. Dr. Helen Drury, we've mentioned on the podcast before. She is working across a number of different things, all to do with maths, as you would imagine, including the Maths Horizon project. And Professor Jeremy Hogden from the University of Nottingham, just down the road from me. Be wonderful if we could get one of these people onto the podcast, although I assume they are going to be incredibly busy over the next 2 years or so, Becky, putting this curriculum together. What a huge job that is. But the nice thing is that they are going to ask for feedback and consultation on this process as they go through it. So yeah, I was pleased. It would have been nice, I think, possibly difficult. I don't know about you, Becky, but would have been nice to see somebody currently serving as a teacher. Would have been great.
Yeah.
I know that they're going to consult with teachers, but I think it might have been difficult to do so. You know, it's tricky, isn't it? You need a certain amount of experience to do something like writing a curriculum, which you don't always get by, I don't mean just, but by being in a classroom. But it would be nice. It would have been nice to have some representation, I think, and I think this has been reflected across other curriculum areas as well. It would have been nice to have
Yeah.
some representation from at least somebody who's been in the classroom very recently, at least even.
Recently, yeah. I think because there'll always be an issue, won't there? Current serving teachers are very, very busy people, and this is a huge job. So I guess that could be difficulty. But yes, some recent classroom experience. Just, as you know, I've been in the classroom very recently myself, and it just brings a little added something.
Yes. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. But it'll be fascinating to see what happens with the curriculum. We will obviously keep you updated and share anything that we hear about it as we're moving towards that date. Which, when we started talking about this, we were talking about this in 2024, that we knew that there was a curriculum on the horizon. It's now 2026. And so we're only, a couple of years away from, in fact, next year, really, the curriculum will be published for consultation. So it won't be that long, really. It just feels like it at the moment, but it won't be that long till we find out a bit more detail about what's going to be in this new curriculum. And that is exciting, I think.
Definitely. Yeah. Really exciting news.
So we asked for your SATs tips and stories, and we had a couple of responses that I thought we'd include, Becky. One with some actual tips and advice, and another slightly more tongue-in-cheek, I think. But so first off, we had a message from Sarah, who is a teacher who spent a lot of time in year 6, not currently in year 6, but a lot of time in year 6. She starts actually by saying, SATs. I don't know whether that's SAT, SATs, or SATs, or SATs. But she spelt it with 4 A's and 1 H. So read into that what you will, Becky. But she said, much like we did last week, really, arithmetic papers. I used to have children who really struggled with anything multiplication or division related, but were brilliant at addition and subtraction. So they'd obviously got that additive structure really firmly in their grasp. Sarah says they would get stuck at question 4 or 5 because it was a times or a divide question, and then never complete the rest of the paper. They stayed stuck. So she introduced the tactic of ignoring the order of the paper, but hunting down all the addition and subtraction questions first. Do those, make sure that you know that you've got those covered off, and then you can work on the other questions, which might take you a little bit longer, but that you've got a bit more time to do then. And she says in her experience, the scores went up dramatically from doing that. So that might be something you might want to look into. She also says that as teachers and adults in the room, we can't say the symbols out loud when we're reading the question. So she trained the children to fill in the blanks when I read things aloud, like they were doing a little duet, she says. She also rewarded them for asking to have the question read to them, so that can become quite competitive, and their scores went up. Because I could read it to them, so they had a chance to process what was being asked. I'm assuming she wasn't doing this with all 30 children in the class. I think this might have been more of a focus group, because can you imagine rewarding all the children for putting their hand up and asking for a question to be read out loud? That
Oh,
would
yeah,
be,
exhausting.
yeah, that would be exhausting and impossible, I think. Finally, she says on the weeks leading up to SATS week, she used to split them into smaller groups. This is something I did as well. I think a lot of schools do, so that the classroom felt less overwhelming. We used to have most of the children do the test in the hall, which just made it easier for us because of the number of adults. You only needed 2 adults in the hall. We had 60 or more children taking the SATs each year. But we gave children the option that if they wanted to sit in a smaller room, or a less intimidating space, then they could do. Some children really liked the idea of being in the hall and saw it as quite a grown-up, rite of passage, didn't they? But other children preferred somewhere that felt a little bit more familiar, and that was absolutely fine as well. So I think giving options around that can be helpful. And then Jack just said, this could be an entire podcast on how amazing the week, Becky, of teaching long division is. Funny in the sense of the chaos that is Monday or Tuesday of introducing it, but the utter relief by Friday when you've wrapped it. I read that and thought, what? I don't think it ever took me less than about 3 weeks to really teach long division. Clearly,
Yeah,
Jack
if
is a
only.
far better teacher than I ever was. A week to teach long division. Wow.
He's right, though, isn't it? That week is very much is that feeling of the slog at the beginning, but that feeling at the end of SATS week for everybody
Yes.
involved is pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, I've done a lot of talking, Becky. I'm afraid people are probably fed up of hearing from me. So let's have a look at your etymology, shall we? So this is the feature where Becky dives into the origins of mathematical words and vocabulary that we use. Where do they come from? What do they mean? And why do we use them? So over to you, Becky.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so this week I linked very closely to our discussion on SATs, really. And I will start with a disclaimer, as always, that if you search hard enough, you can find etymology coming from various points. So I have tried to bring together all of my research today, but please, if it's not quite right, you can always let me know. So I was thinking specifically about use of language around tests. I think in maths, we tend to use certain terms interchangeably or nearly interchangeably, and that can be really confusing. I think we've talked before, haven't we, about use of everyday words and having a maths meaning, and how that can be quite confusing. But I do remember specifically children becoming quite confused by the use of, for example, the word integer. It's not something, unless you, and I think people are more aware of it these days, but unless you are using that term often, which I would say is a good thing to do, it can, if you're always using number and then integer appears in a test, that can be really quite off-putting. So that sort of led me to looking at the etymology of some words that are that mean number or nearly mean number, and where they all came from. So starting with integer, it came from Latin, as did all of our words today, actually, and most of the time come from Latin.
Latin
and
or
it
Greek,
comes,
they tend to be, don't they?
yes. Yeah, I'm yet to find a Norse one, but I think maybe I'll make that my focus for next time.
That'd be great if you could. Yeah.
Yes.
We have a word from around the world. We've had some Arabic ones as well, actually.
Yes, we
Zero, I
have.
think we
Yeah.
found was Arabic in origin, didn't we?
Yeah, we have. So Latin, it comes from the Latin adjective, integer. I'm not sure how you'd pronounce that, but it's spelt the same as integer. And it means intact or whole or complete. So literally meaning coming from untouched, from not touched, and the root tag touch. So not touched in a whole way, or a whole number,
Not broken
as we
up
use
at all.
it.
Yeah.
Not broken
complete.
up at all.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. That does
does.
make sense. I mean, it's quite a strange word, isn't it? Integer. It doesn't link to anything else we tend to use.
Not an everyday kind of language.
No. but that's that one. And then I also started to think about digit. Now, obviously, we know that we couldn't use them digit and number interchangeably. Digit is a numeral below 10, a single digit, although we do obviously then have 2-digit numbers and so on. And that comes from also from Latin, digitus. Digitus meaning finger or toe. So
Ah,
we
okay.
do, yeah, and we do sometimes refer to toes as digits, don't we? And I
Yep.
think that all came from it. It's there's quite a convoluted way to this, but it all came from the practice of counting on fingers. So
Well,
digit,
we've talked before, haven't we, about the link between base 10 and the fact that we have 10 fingers. And if we'd been born on a different planet, maybe with 12 fingers, maybe we'd use base 12 a bit more often. So that sort of makes sense as well, doesn't it?
yeah. So there's digit. And then I looked at numeral. So this one is often confusing, particularly if you happen to be in maybe year 4 and teaching Roman numerals.
Yeah.
And that might be the only time or one of the only times that children might have heard that word. And I have before been in year 4 and a question has asked for the answer given in numerals. And the children have assumed that that has meant Roman numerals, adding a whole level of complexity that wasn't needed. So,
Did
yes.
they get it right, though, if they answered it correctly in Roman numerals?
Well, I think most of the time, yes, because actually, I think although I think we've talked about my feelings about Roman numerals before, I think
Yes.
children quite enjoy it. I think children quite like Roman numerals, and particularly if they understand them, I think they quite like to
Yes.
show
Oh,
that
it
off. So,
helps, doesn't it? Yeah.
yeah. So numeral comes from the Latin numeralis, of or belonging to a number. So numerous being number and the suffix alis meaning pertaining to, often used to change an adjective to a noun. So that's where numeral came from. And the final one you don't see as often, I don't think, although it creeps into the secondary curriculum much more when you start thinking about significant figures and things, is the word figure. Sometimes used. It has appeared in SATS tests before, I think. Also, another Latin word from figura, meaning the shape, form, or outline. So it's more about the written form of the number rather than what the quantity was in the number. So all from Latin, those ones, all meaning the same or slightly different. But it's just quite interesting to dive into those a bit deeper.
Yeah, quite specific words for different types of number, I suppose, or different representations of specific numbers.
Yeah.
We can get tied up, can't we, in trying to, not say the wrong thing around these things. But interesting. Okay. Well, thanks
Yeah.
for that, Becky. It's always handy, I think, to know where, particularly words like integer, where that comes from and the meaning of it, meaning whole and complete. Because I think if you can, um, I would always use that with children to explain what an unfamiliar word means. Let's get back to where it's come from and try and explain that, because I think it just sticks with you a little bit more, possibly.
Yeah.
And knowing that an integer is a whole number, because the word integer means complete and untouched. So yeah, I like that. Thanks, Becky.
There you go. Hopefully, I mean, I just think sometimes it's helpful to be able to differentiate between them a little bit. And I think children like that as well. It just underlines how difficult it is, doesn't it? And how important it is to use these terms interchangeably and often so that children are familiar with them.
But correctly as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, hopefully.
being the key thing there, I think. If you can use them in their correct context, that is really particularly helpful. Right. Have you got your stopwatch ready, Becky?
I'm getting it now, John. Although, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how close we've got to 60 seconds yet, but we've been a little way away.
Miles off, I would imagine, but I'll be
Yeah.
interested to see how close we get today.
Okay.
Okay, I am limbered up and ready. So let's get a few lunges in. So this is our research in 60-ish seconds. And we can start now. So this week's research comes from the journal Learning and Instruction, and it's one from the future, Becky, because this is volume 101, which comes out in February 2026. So look out for that. The title of the paper is Writing or Speaking, the Role of Production Medium in the Effectiveness of Learning Journals, which is a long way of saying, is it better to write down your thoughts or to speak them out loud in terms of the effectiveness of thinking about your learning. So the study looked at learning journals where learners explain what they've learned and reflect on their understanding. And the researchers were interested in two things: whether speaking a learning journal is more effective than writing one, and whether adding prompts help learners to use better learning strategies and remember more over time. They worked with 163 secondary school students, so quite a large sample, but not enormous. All students watched the same video lesson on cognitive load theory, which I'm sure they were delighted with. And afterwards, they were placed into one of several groups. One wrote a learning journal, one spoke a learning journal aloud, one wrote or spoke with prompts that encouraged thinking about understanding or strategies, and then a control group that simply reread and underlined the material, a bit like I used to do when I was trying to cram for exams and things. Students then completed a test 1 day later and again 1 week later. So you've got that idea of coming back to things in the short term and in the slightly longer term. The researchers also analysed the journals themselves to see which learning strategies students used. They found that students who spoke their learning journals learned more than those who wrote them, both immediately and a week later, which I thought was interesting, Becky, because I always
Oh,
found writing things to be a way of getting things to stick in my head. But apparently, perhaps I should have been speaking them out loud a bit more often. Spoken
oh.
journals were around 4 times longer, and students used more effective learning strategies when speaking. So perhaps that's because of how long it takes and the effort it takes to write something down compared to speaking it out loud, I suppose. Prompts had a mixed effect. Prompts encouraging reflection on understanding increased metacognitive thinking. Prompts encouraging specific learning strategies did not reliably increase those strategies. So, getting children to think about their reflections is helpful, but focusing on a specific learning strategy less helpful. Importantly, students who used more cognitive strategies, such as explaining ideas and making connections, showed better learning outcomes. Metacognitive strategies helped indirectly by supporting those cognitive strategies. So, thinking about the thinking was useful. So, for me, this challenges the assumption that learning always improves when pupils write things down. And sometimes we wonder why we do the writing things down. Often I think it's so that we've got some evidence, because speaking is lost, isn't it, in some way, and we need to be accountable for things. But that, you could argue, is not the best way for learning to necessarily always happen. Speaking appears to reduce the effort involved in getting ideas out, which frees pupils to think more deeply, and younger learners, or those who struggle with writing, oral reflection may allow understanding to develop without being held back by transcription demands. So for school leaders, for me, this raises questions about how reflection, journaling, and retrieval activities are designed across the school and within lessons, particularly for pupils with SEND or lower confidence in writing. So, well, how long was that, Becky? I reckon about 3 minutes, was it?
3 minutes, 39
Oh,
seconds.
wow. Okay, so we'll round it up to 4 minutes. Still, I mean,
You did a good
useful,
job.
hopefully useful. I think I've tried to. It's quite a long paper that I've tried to reduce down into something more bite-sized. But for me, the sort of key takeaway there was really this idea of oracy or oracy, so important for encouraging pupils to explain their ideas rather than just writing them down. And this idea of collaboration and being able to talk about things, talk through their thinking, perhaps with some guidance from the teacher about, what do you notice? Those key questions, really important, can help not just improve understanding, but also retention, which was the key thing for me. The bit that surprised me a little bit was that those students retained the information more. So we're not saying that writing doesn't have any value, but the spoken reflection can be powerful and inclusive as an alternative.
Yeah, a brilliant bit of research, Jon. I think any research that can back up that sort of conversation we've been having a lot around things shouldn't be just for evidence sake. And I think
Yeah.
maths talk, I mean, we've been talking about it lots. It's the Oracy framework coming out and all the chat around that has been brilliant. But yeah, great piece of research. And yeah, I think I was quite surprised as well. But I think that's because I am somebody who likes to write things down. And I appreciate that that's not the same for everybody and
But
always not
perhaps
possible
there's
for
something
everybody.
in combining the two, writing things down and then creating a verbal presentation and things. I don't know, maybe there's something in that. I know it's difficult time-wise, and things. But again, for me, it's just another example of when maths lessons are best, when pupils are actively doing the maths and engaging with it and thinking about it. Because when you're having to talk about it, you do have to understand it, don't you? If you're talking about it without notes, particularly, you do have to have really internalized it
Yeah,
and understood it. So any opportunities to do that thinking and talking, noticing and exploring out loud. We know current pressures often push teaching more towards children watching one person explaining things or doing things. But I think wherever we can, it's far better to have pupils engaged actively in the lesson and exploring things for themselves.
definitely.
Well, that brings us to the end of another AfterMaths episode. Thank you, Becky. We covered an awful lot there, I feel. The start of this episode seems like a long time ago, even though it was only 40 minutes ago.
It
But
does.
yeah, we covered a lot. We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We've talked about lots today, Jon. We hope you enjoyed listening to today's AfterMaths. And if you did, please, as Jon mentioned earlier, do leave a rating or a review or share with somebody who you think might find our podcast interesting.
Yeah, it's been lovely actually recently, Becky, I've not shared this with you, I don't think, actually, but on LinkedIn and in a newsletter that a maths consultant sends out to their 400 or 500 maths leaders that subscribe to the newsletter. We've been recommended. This podcast has been recommended. So a couple of
That's
times on
great.
LinkedIn this week and in that newsletter. And that's just lovely to see because clearly, people are enjoying thinking and listening and talking about maths. So we really enjoy doing this, don't we? And we're glad that people are enjoying listening to it as well. If you have any ideas of anything that you would like to be featured or any questions for us, we're happy to do a sort of Q&A in the Aftermaths episode sometimes. Just get in touch, primarymathspodcast@twinkle.co.uk. We would love to hear from you, whatever you've got to say, really.
And we'll be back again next Tuesday. You have another brilliant interview lined up, I believe, Jon.
Yes, Becky, absolutely. So on Tuesday, I've got the pleasure of being joined by not one, but two guests. We've got Tom Manners and Steve Lomax, who are going to be talking to me all about problem solving again, the difficulties with problem solving and some of the ways that we can help pupils to access problem solving activities. So I'm looking forward to that one. It should be really good. That will be out on Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. In the meantime, we hope you have a fantastic weekend and we will see you then.
See you next time.
Thanks. Bye.